All right, we are live. Lee, how's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you? How are you doing?
Good. Thank you very much for joining me here on this course. I should mention that this was all your idea, man. You called me and said, let's do this stream. Let's do a collaboration. I'm like, I don't even know how to do that. You're making me get outside my comfort zone here.
Well, I saw your stream with the JG Calisthenics, and it was just one of those ones that I've been watching your stuff for a while. I've read a couple of your books, and I thought if I've got an opportunity to talk to you, I might as well do it. You know, we've got similar channel niches. There's bound to be a lot more which I've already learned. I'm bound to learn more from having a conversation with you, and maybe your viewers or mine might learn something too. So I thought it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. I mean, we're all here to learn and collaborate and grow and share ideas and bounce things off of each other, because no matter what you know and how much you bring to the table, it's always limited to some degree. So that's why you always want to be working with other people, of course, because just getting a fresh pair of eyes on a situation can open up whole new doors for you.
I think especially as well, I think a lot of us have quite dogmatic sort of styles of training. So I think until you start interacting with other people and learning about new different styles, like I think that's the great thing about fitness is there's so many different ways in which you can explore different types of training, and you learn that through streams and interacting with other people. So it's good to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for having me on, by the way. I appreciate it.
Of course. And people are starting to pop on in. Gelato on console. How's it going? Michael from Drop Weight Daddy. Hello, Michael. Good to see you. Abdul. Hey, how's it going? So let's jump right into our main topic for the day. We're talking weighted calisthenics. We were discussing this earlier. We both practice it. We also both have the plate-loaded kensui weight vest, which is
very good.
Fantastic. I don't know, but we haven't even really talked that much about it, but I just think it's one of the greatest things to come out in the world of weighted calisthenics. Tell us more on your approach to weighted calisthenics and some of your top tips.
For me, I think more people, I don't think a lot of people really understand how to utilize weighted calisthenics efficiently. I think it's very, again, quite taboo sometimes in calisthenics. They kind of feel like, well, it's not calisthenics or body weight if you're adding weights. So some people will think, oh, I'm not sure how to use it. But I think calisthenics is great to the fact that it makes progressive overload a lot easier to track, to see how to make it. It makes it more measurable for a lot of people who are training typically or so used to seeing weight training where progressive overload is seen as more weight each time. That sort of principle of progressive overload is very, very easy to understand. So if you implement weighted calisthenics in, it can make body weight training and transfer into that a lot easier for people to understand progressive overload, which is key to getting bigger and stronger. So plus, I feel it's really, really good to fine tune some of the most basic exercises. So if you, like for me, pull-ups, rows, push-ups, dips, handstand push-ups, stuff like that for upper body, if you get into weighted calisthenics, you're fine tuning those exercises even further. And it's like the repetition is the mother of all learning. The more you do something, the better you get. So if you keep doing pull-ups, then you start adding weight, and then you get even better and better at pull-ups, and the weight keeps going on. You're fine-tuning that exercise, which I think if you focus on those exercises, you're going to build a great body. Like I'm very, very into minimalist types of training. You focus on that, I think you get more bang for your buck. And once you start adding weighted calisthenics, especially exercises like the push-up, where once you get strong enough where you're doing 10, 15, 20, like most people push-ups to the side, like they don't realize there's other ways in which you can create that intensity. And I know in your book you've talked about, you know, bringing things in closer and start using leverages to make certain exercises more challenging. But the majority of people will skip straight to the dip, and then they start going to more harder things, where if you get into weighted calisthenics, stuff like the push-up, which is such a great exercise, you can start really utilizing and getting more out of. And if you've got the vest that we've got, you start cracking in 20, 30, 40, 50 kilo push-ups, you're going to have a really, really strong upper body. You know, it's a great move that you can sort of incorporate. But I think the more people that get into calisthenics, weighted calisthenics, I think it makes calisthenics simpler as well. Because once you start getting into convict conditioning sort of style, and I've been reading Overcoming Gravity, and the different progressions there can be quite confusing for a lot of people. And some of the jumps in progressions can take quite a long time. And a lot of people I find are very impatient between some of the progressions.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to just like add another plate, like that is a simpler way of making progressive overload for a lot of people that might find it easier. It's not overall better, but it's just sometimes a simpler way of doing it.
It's a bit of it's not better or worse or anything. It's just another avenue. We have options. And I'm a big fan of have a lot of tools. That way, if one thing's not quite jiving with you, you've got options. You don't have to force yourself to keep going with that. Now, we can answer questions here, everybody who's watching. We're not just talking to ourselves. We want to talk to you, too. One of the questions we got here, of course, very good. If we slow the rep motion, does it lead to hypertrophy? It can, in my experience. Control is an aspect of strength. And sometimes when we're repping through things so fast, we're kind of getting sloppy. So if we slow down and we get better control, that usually leads to a greater stimulus. What's your take on that, Lee?
I think one of the key things, if you slow down the repetition, you're going to be getting longer time under tension. And time under tension is a key thing when it comes to muscle growth. Like that is a key thing. But obviously, like you were talking about with variables, that's one way or one tool in the toolbox in which you can use to stimulate growth. I would say if you wanted to break it down further, you got the two different types of hypertrophy. You got seismoplasmic and you got myofibrillar. I would say slower going down that sort of route would be more seismoplasmic hypertrophy, where if you were to say do those reps faster and more explosive and you start activating the more fast twitch muscle fibers, I would feel you would get more strength and you would get just as much muscle growth that way as well. So that's the great thing about this sort of type of training is there's so many different variables in which you can go and even highlight in the same training session. So you could do fast and then burn out with slow. There's different variables.
Change it up. Again, having the option is key. You don't want to just be like, there's one correct way to do this. Again, the dogmatic will pigeonhole you and it will prevent you from getting new options. So another question, I know this one's going to come up quite a bit, is basically looking at how many reps of like body weight should you be looking at before you can add weight? Do you have like a qualifying limit, or do you just kind of go by feel?
I thought this question would come up, so I've got kind of like two answers with it. I think one of them, which is a really great approach, which is, I can't say his last name, but the guy who created the kettlebells and brought them over from Russia, Pavel something.
Tatsulan.
That's the one. He came up with this theory that you want to pick a weight that, let's say, you can do 5 reps with, that's heavy, that is challenging, but you always leave 1 rep in the tank so you don't always hit fatigue, otherwise you'll burn out your central nervous system. And he said, stay at that weight until that weight becomes easy. Once that weight becomes easy, whether it could be a month, 2 months, 3 months, then add on, you can sometimes add on a larger increment, whether you're doing 5, 10 kg at one time, shock the system until you can do 5 reps again, then stay at that weight until it's like, right, this is easy now, I can jump on. It's like that plate is a part of you now. That's one approach that I've tried that is successful. It tends to be harder for people to stick to because it feels a little boring, because people like the idea of every single session or every single week, another plate, and you feel that progression. Even though it's smaller increments, it feels more like you're doing something successful. What you're doing is working. Or you could do it every single week. If you're a beginner, every probably workout you could add. If you're an intermediate, I would say possibly every week. If you're doing full body 3 times a week, that'll probably work. Depends what your frequency is like as well. But they're two different approaches.
Yeah, it's almost, you gotta see what you respond to as well. One of the things too that I often hear is that we were going back onto weight training, you know, straightforward and stuff. And one of the things I just quickly wanted to mention is that yes, adding weight is very simple as far as resistance, but let's not forget that there's still that technical aspect to it. If we are adding weight at the cost of our technical proficiency, that's not going forwards or as much, or maybe even going backwards. And this is the biggest mistake I made with weighted calisthenics, was I would get more and more weight as much as I possibly could. I always thought, well, if I'm adding weight, I'm getting stronger, but my technique was going terrible. Shorter range of motion. I'd be doing dips like this, you know, kind of thing. Very low stability.
Turkey neck and going on.
So yeah, we're still going after tension, not weight, which is influenced by weight, which influences resistance, but technique is still priority with this. We can't just mindlessly look at weight and reps and think that's all there is to it, because there's still that other motion to it. Now, did you make that same mistake, or like I did, or were you just smart enough to avoid that altogether?
I think when I was probably younger, I think ego always takes over, doesn't that? That's if you're doing weighted calisthenics. I mean, I used to be really big into powerlifting, strongman training. That's where I know I spent 3 or 4 years mainly in powerlifting and incorporating a bit of calisthenics as well. I've always gone and off. I'll have time doing weight training and I come off and do calisthenics, and I kind of like on seasons do it. But I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the points I would say, the downfall of weighted calisthenics is people get too fixated on the weight. And that becomes then their overall goal, as opposed to looking at that weight as, this is a variable, this is a tool in the toolbox to allow me to, as you've said many times in your book, about using your brain to put tension in that muscle. When you add that resistance, you are forced to put more tension in that muscle. That's what's making you grow. That is what you've got to concentrate on. And if you are adding weight at the expense of cutting range of motion, because you're so eager to get another rep or to up the weight you're pulling up, and instead of it being chest to bar, which is you've always done, you're now putting your neck over. You're trying to cheat to get your weight up. That is an issue. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was, people have sometimes the wrong attitude when it comes to using weight, when it should be, I'm now at 10 kg pull-ups. What can I do to really wring out as much gains, as you want to call it, out of that 10 kg before I want to move on? I want to wring out as much as I can until that weight does nothing for me anymore. Now I'm ready to move, which is why I quite like the approach of, if you're doing 5 reps, once you get to 8, then you up the weight, or at least when you get to 3 sets of 8, like on recommended routine, wait there until that now becomes easy. You've now squeezed everything you can out of that weight. It has no more use for you. You've made your adaptations, give me some more weight, sort of thing. And I think that is a good way to go with it.
Awesome. Awesome. Very good. Next question. This one's really good, actually. Let me see if I can find it again here. Yes. So weighted calisthenics versus ring training. Now, personally, I'm like, well, both. I do both, because when you add weight to the basic movement patterns on the rings, like weighted ring dips, weighted ring pull-ups, ring push-ups, the benefit for me I see is you get a lot more flexibility as far as hand position, shoulder position and stuff. It's easier on the joints, but you also don't need nearly as much weight in order to do that. Like if I could do 70 pounds on dips on dip bar, but I'll go onto rings, and ring dips are now 25 pounds. I see that as a big bonus, as a step in the right direction. So I would say definitely use the two together. Do you do weighted calisthenics on rings at all? Yeah,
I mean, one of my favorite bits of kit is the gymnastic rings. I think it's one of the most useful bits of equipment you can use. And I think everything you do on the rings, I think, I'm quite biased, is better on the rings. Push-ups, so much better on the rings, because you can kind of get a hybrid between a push-up and a fly at the same time. You've got that that freedom of movement. Same with the rows, especially with the dips, because when you do a fixed bar dip, everyone is built differently. So you can't always get the right width that's just for you. But when you use the rings, you've just got that. I like the way it allows your body to move, like as opposed to you being fixed and you move your body around the bar. You can move your body around the rings, and that feels a lot better for me on the joints, especially with the pull-ups. I do pull-ups. If I'm doing weighted ones, I tend to do it with the fixed bar, but I like to be able to do the rotation. It feels a lot better in the shoulder. It feels a lot better in the joints. And I do feel you get a bit more bicep activation because you've got that supination in there as well. And I took your advice, and I managed to find myself a pair of rock rings. I managed to get some on eBay eventually, and they are brutal on your fingers, but they're great because you can get in there and you've got that rotation, and you can actually, because you've got that freedom of movement, I kind of like to come in and then go in there, and you get a lot more of a range of motion, and you can utilize your mid back. So when you're doing pull-ups, instead of it just being a vertical pull, you can kind of turn it into a bit of a hybrid between the two, which more bang for your buck, which I'm a big fan of. So
yeah, it feels so good. And when you look at the anatomy of the musculature too, right? Our muscles don't just go in like straight lines up and down the body. They wrap around in many cases. They go in almost like a spiral effect. And the best way to ensure we're working the muscle well and keeping stress out of the joint is to apply resistance along the direction of our muscle fibers. So if in many cases our fibers are going around a joint, that rotation helps to align the tension along that. So it just works more with the body rather than against it. Totally.
Especially with stuff like the chin-ups, I find, especially when you're at the bottom, it's quite stressful on the wrist. So it's nice to be able to have that, even if you start in sort of a neutral grip and then you pull in, you rotate and pull it in, it just feels so much nicer on there. But like I said, if anyone wants to buy a piece of equipment, gymnastic rings, you can't go wrong with a pair of them. Yeah,
that rotational aspect is very key. And they've got, now you see the product on social media, the Angle 90 handles that rotate.
I've got a pair of them.
Yep. And what do you find about those? I haven't used those yet.
I like them. They're good. I only really use it for pull-ups. If you're in the gym, I think it's handy. I mean, I don't like machines. I try and stay away from them, but I understand some people find benefit in them. So if you want to try and make the lat pull down or the fixed bars a little bit more user-friendly, they are really, really handy for that. Or if you want to do a deadlift, they're good at turning, I guess, a typical standard deadlift into maybe like a trap bar deadlift in a way, because you've got that rotation, you can hold it that way. But I find the strap, it wears on your fingers, so it gets a bit uncomfortable after a while. But for the price, but then again, buy a pair of rings.
Yeah, I agree. I made a set of handles years ago where it was just PVC, and I had to think through that, and I was like, this feels good, but I had the same experience. It's just like, there's pressure there. It doesn't need to be there. And when I started using rings or just very like rope trainers and stuff, I'm like, it's the same thing, but it's more comfortable. So I
recently got the nano bars from people the same one that did the vest. So I'm doing a review video. I'm working on it. I've been doing it today, working on a review for one of them. But when it comes to that, it feels exactly the same. It's nice. It's just kind of like a hybrid bit of a tool. So yeah, much better.
Cool. Next question, Mr. Shark B here, talking about volume being bad, cortisol levels and everything like that. But then again, there are examples of great athletes trained with high cortisol levels. Now, this is to me an example of very limited perception being applied to a wide topic like cortisol. You know, cortisol, once you start convincing people it's the worst thing in the world, anything that causes stress is bad for you. But it's a very nuanced thing. Like some people, it's all about balance. You can have a ton of cortisol coursing through your body every day and be perfectly fine, depending on how well you can handle it, your conditioning, your ability to cope with stress, physical and emotional stress and stuff. You can stress yourself out more than most people and be relatively cool. But some people, they get a little bit of stress and it's overloading their system real fast. Like someone who's out of shape, they're going to get a cortisol hit in 5 minutes of exercise. But you take someone who's like Herschel Walker, he could probably work out for 3 hours and be relatively fine comparatively. What's your thoughts on that one, Lee?
I mean, it's a natural sort of thing in the body that you're always going to be dealing with. And I think as we live in such stressful lives, it's something that I think we're always going to be aware of or will have as much of an impact. But with the excessive volume, I mean, if you're doing a lot of volume and a lot of work, one of the things that would stand out for me is obviously the overtraining and the stress on the central nervous system. That then brings on chronic fatigue and you just feel tired all the time. Again, excessive volume is a stress on the body if you're doing too much. And if you're adding stress upon stress upon stress, it just builds up on the body. You know, I don't really know too much about cortisol, if I'm honest. It's not something I've ever really worried about. I think it's one of those ones where I think, like you said, like you can't pick one particular thing when there's so many different variables that can be impacting someone's situation, which is going to be very, very subjective. So it's hard to pinpoint that. But I mean, if you're doing excessive volume, that is already a stress on your body. Exercise is a stress on your body and it's needed because then that brings on adaptation. So excessive, yeah, probably. But yeah.
I think that really put it right down there. I mean, everybody has their own windows. And one of the things that we want to be able to accomplish with our training is to be able to handle more stress. Because there's this idea out there that like getting in shape is actually bad in many ways. You'll hear this sometimes where people say, oh, you don't want to become efficient in your exercises, because if you run a mile and it crushes you, that's good. But if you get in shape and you run a mile and it's barely anything, that's not stimulating a response. And to that, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because when you run a mile, your body's getting the same stimulus, regardless of if it's crushing you or if it's easy. You're getting the stimulus to run a mile. But we want our body to be efficient and be able to handle stress pretty easily, because the better you do that, the easier it is to be productive in our training. But if someone's out of shape, they do 10 push-ups and they're smoked, it's a lot harder for them to be productive. So don't worry about, oh, I don't want to push my body too hard, cortisol and all that. Like, train yourself to handle a lot of cortisol. Train yourself to be able to handle a lot of stress and recover from that stress, and you'll be all the better for it.
It's also about building overall work capacity too, isn't it? So every single time you're training, it's about building up your body's overall work capacity. And as that improves, your recovery should go with it. So what started out as working out was quite hard. You build up and build up and build up, and before you know it, you're doing 10, 15 sets in a workout, and it's fine, when before it burnt you out. So it's that adaptation of stress that allows you to deal with more, which is exactly what you want, like you said.
So let's address this question here. We're getting quite a bit on cramping hamstrings, TRX bridge curls and stuff. This is something I have experienced a lot with myself, just because it happens quite often. And I always warn people before I give them that exercise. I'm like, your hamstrings, probably going to cramp on this, largely because the vast majority of people who haven't done that exercise have never worked their hamstrings even close to that level of intensity. That's one of the hardest hamstring exercises you can do. But the answer for that, I always tell people, is shorter range of motion. Put your hands on the ground and try and push as hard as you can with your hands. You're basically trying to make your hamstring not work as hard. Our muscles are cramping in that case because they're getting overloaded. So you want to decrease the stress just a little bit and then gradually build it up, and then your hamstrings will be bulletproof and they'll be able to handle anything without cramping up. I had the same exact issue myself. Whoa, boy, did I ever have that bad hamstring cramping. Have you ever had much issues with hamstrings or other muscles cramping, Lee?
It's weird you say that. I've got awful hamstrings right now. I spent like 6 hours the other day digging the garden. My hamstrings are screwed for some reason. I don't know why, but I've never done it with the TRX. But I normally do it with like one of those gym medicine balls. And put my feet up on them and like curl them in, and obviously if it's too easy you go to single leg. But whenever I do something like that, the contraction in your hamstrings is a lot. But I think, like you said, not a lot of people do that unless you go to a gym that has a ham curl machine, which I'm not a fan of. But unless you use that, a lot of people haven't felt that kind of like isolated contraction in their hamstring before, and if they're not used to doing that, it's going to cramp, isn't it? And again, a lot of people, if you're sitting down, a lot of people have more sedentary lives, you know, that's going to have an impact on your hamstrings even being inactive or like just tight and things like that. So the way that we live, I think, has that impact. Or it could be because we sit down a lot of people have inactive glutes. So when they do start doing exercises like that, the hamstrings are taking over and doing too much, and they end up sort of fatiguing. So when you go and do some more work on them, they just burn out and cramp. There's that too. Yeah,
it's the worst time I ever had with my hamstrings, because I used to think, oh, sure, I kind of work my hamstrings even though I had poor activation. And I was in a bike race one time, a mountain bike race. It was 50 miles, and towards the end of the race, I always had a little bit of cramping in hamstrings, but one time it cramped so much, it felt like I was literally getting stabbed in my leg. Like it was just ripping off. I'm laying there literally screaming bloody murder on the trail. People are like, oh my God, what do we do? And it was the worst. So my advice to everybody is, if you've got a muscle that's cramping, back off a little bit, but work it regularly. Like get those hamstring curls in at least 3 or 4 times a week. It's cramping because it's not used to being worked or to that level. So get it used to being worked and worked more progressively, and it will cease to be an issue. All right, so let's moving on. Next question, back onto weighted calisthenics. Simply put, is weighted calisthenics necessary to build muscle? No. Remember, we need tension to build muscle. As long as you have tension, the reason why the tension there is not quite as important. Muscles don't understand different exercises. They don't understand weight versus technique and stuff. However, I will say that many people may find it's easier with weighted calisthenics or supplementing with weighted calisthenics as opposed to going without them. Would you concur on that one, Lee?
Yeah, I would. I think, like I said before, it is an easier thing to do. It's definitely a lot easier to manage. And if you're utilizing exercises that you've already done before, and you've already established good form, like you've trained your central nervous system to be efficient at the pull-up, once you start adding weight, it's not so much you're having to relearn the form. If you're going into, say, some skill work, it's already been fine-tuned. You just got to adapt with that new added weight. So, but it's great also for helping you to transition, I think, between skills too, because it's at the end of the day, like you said, your body doesn't know, it just knows tension. It's another way in which you can add tension on. So just think weighted calisthenics is another tool that you can utilize when you need to, even just for fun, but another way of breaking through a plateau. Add in some weighted pull-ups one time. If you get a bit stagnant on your pull-ups, add them in and see how that new stimulus feels.
Wow. I've noticed that the two complement each other so well, because sometimes with the progressive calisthenics, I'm just kind of lacking a bit of just building strength for several weeks to get better at it. So in that case, I'll use the weighted calisthenics to just build up some more strength, get myself used to it, and then those archer push-ups get a lot easier. Yeah. But on the other hand, I've also noticed that the progressive calisthenics help with the weighted stuff, because when you do the progressive techniques, that highlights weaknesses and imbalances you may have. Like, oh, I don't have as much shoulder stability as I thought I did. Work on that. And then when you do the weighted dips and stuff, you're like, oh, wow, that got a lot stronger. So they're like two complementary disciplines. Yeah. And it's a mistake, I think, to be like just one, the other one is bad. Yeah. That's where we're running into the problems.
And I think as well, with what you highlighted there, it's exactly the same as if you go from normal to ring training. Because as soon as you put yourself on some rings, I've seen some people that are very, very strong. They feel like they had a good bench press. I stuck them on the rings and they're struggling just to hold themselves there, and they're shaking, and they're like, they don't understand why, but it's just, that just highlights your missing stability. And once you gain that stability, you will be a lot stronger once you go back to a normal dip. That strength, because again, to create that stability, you want extra strength to sort of make up for it until you build it up, if you know what I mean. So that highlights you're missing the strength in your stability muscles. So once you work on them and then go back to a normal bar, it's a great thing to add in if you want to, again, make extra progressions.
Absolutely. Again, options. Give yourselves options, folks. Don't get pigeonholed. Don't feel like you have to do things one particular way. If you're starting to think, oh, I feel like I might want to incorporate this, or I might want to do that, then probably should be doing that. It's your body's saying, I want to go in this direction. So play with that, experiment. So now time for a fun question here. This is Bernard. You're on Desert Island. You got 3 exercises to gain muscle. What would you choose, Lee? Go.
Is there equipment in this, or is it literally just what I can do? It doesn't really matter.
Wide open. You could do powerlifting. You could do calisthenics, whatever you wanted.
Definitely the pull-up. Cross between dips and handstand push-ups. My pushing.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Tough one. I like my handstands. I think for overall mass, everything, I think it'll probably be the deadlift or trap bar deadlift. Trap bar deadlift will go handstand push-ups and pull-ups.
So I would go with pull-up as well. Dip, so I would basically have a suspension system or rings or something, so that takes care of those. And I would go with weighted lunges, like just carry rocks. You got logs there on the desert island or something. Lunges or Bulgarian split squats. That would be my way to go for sure. But remember,
that's quite good, doesn't it?
Yeah, you'll notice, folks, we're keeping to the push-pull-squat format here. Yeah. Like push-pull-squat, that's your bread and butter right there. Something pushing, something pulling, compound movements, and something of a squatting nature. Like that's your main MO, regardless of what methods you're using. Like if I got into weight machines, I'd be like, yeah, push-pull-squat kind of idea. Leg press, bench press machine, lat pull down, same exact thing. We're just talking about a different vehicle here, but when you have different vehicles, getting to the destination still goes on the same route. Let's move along here. People are asking great questions. So we got calisthenics, low back, hip pain. As soon as the core would negate this, maybe might take it up. I'm heavier. My abs are always sore after pull-ups. It's a good sign there, Clayton. If your abs are sore after pull-ups, it could be abs. Could also potentially be hips, though, glutes and hamstrings. That's where a lot of stability for your lower back comes from. And usually if we can improve the glute and hamstring complex with the abs, the two work together. They're kind of like they're balancing each other out. If one is turned off, then you're creating a misalignment. What's your experience with that, Lee?
I think it goes beyond just, I guess, calisthenics. People, I think, again, lifestyle. Like you said, that whole hip complex, the core and the hip joint, they're in unison. So if you've got one that's tight, another one's going to be weak. And then you start, a lot of people have that sort of duck lordosis sort of impact. And again, a lot of people get lower back pain from that. And sometimes people think that's tight, I've got to stretch it. So they end up stretching it. They might get a little bit of brief, oh, it seems to go away, but the pain never goes away because that muscle doesn't need to be stretched. It needs to be, I don't know, whether you foam roll it, then strengthen it, and then work on the opposing muscle. So sometimes it can be a bit of a difficult one. It depends what your lifestyle is. And obviously, if your core is hurting while doing pull-ups, we said it might just be one of those ones. If you're doing pull-ups properly, you should really feel it in your core. You know, so yeah, I would say a lot of the time it's lifestyle, muscular imbalances and things like that within the hip and the core.
Yeah, and sometimes when pain is resulting, that usually means form is starting to break down. A lot of times I've heard people say like volume is bad for the joints, or doing this many reps is bad for the back or anything like that. But it's not the volume, it's not the reps, it's because they're doing it so much that they're getting tired, their form is breaking down, their tension and their alignment is off. And that's what's creating the pain. It's rather than saying I did 20 straight pull-ups, now my elbows hurt. Well, if your 1 through 19 was fine, but rep number 20, you lost it in the back. You had too much internal rotation, I'm guessing. But it's usually what's breaking down with the volume. That's more the problem than the actual volume itself. Let's see. What else we got here? Cure elbow pain during all pushing movements is very, let's talk a little about the joint pain, because that's probably going to be a little bit more of a thing to deal with, especially like weighted pull-ups and stuff like that. Pushing movements in particular. Now, I should first premise just by saying that pain is terrible to diagnose on YouTube. I get questions all the time. I've got pain in this area. What do I do? And my answer is always the same. See a doctor. Get someone to hands-on assess it. Otherwise, my guess is as good as yours. Like I might as well just flip coin. I don't know, decrease volume. I'm purely guessing. So pain is something we want diagnosed in person. But if we're in the field and we got to address it real quick, what are your things that you start looking for, Lee?
Yeah, like you said, unless you're there and you can say watch form to see how they're performing the exercise, because I know you brought it up many times, like a lot of the time there's nothing wrong with a certain exercise, it's how you're doing it. So we would have to look at the form and what you're doing it. But a lot of the time, depends what sort of, I say, rep range or intensity you're working with, because a lot of the time people don't realize that your muscles grow quicker than your connective tissue. And you can have a really, really strong muscle, but that force is only going to be transmitted through your tendon. So your tendon either needs to be as strong, or your body's going to not put as much force because it's trying to protect the tendon. So it depends whether if you're doing a lot of heavy lifting, whether it is weighted calisthenics, if you're putting too much stress on your connective tissue, it doesn't grow as fast and it takes a lot longer to recover. So you have to sometimes look at it. It might not always be volume. It might just be that you're lifting too heavy, too much. So sometimes it can be best just to scale back, go to lighter reps to allow a bit more blood flow to get into the joint, into the tendons and ligaments to get a bit of recovery, and then probably drop back the volume a little bit as well, and then see how it feels. But obviously, without knowing you and everything else is going on, best to see a doctor.
I'm guessing. Yep. Yeah. We're just pulling out whatever we think of. Here's one that I wanted to address real quick. Does the ab roller target the lats? My answer, it should. It should be. And one of the things I've noticed for me lately that's made a big difference is stability for the ab roller should come from your traps as well. I was talking with a buddy of mine, and he's like, you know what gets my traps sore as all hell is the ab roller. Every time I do the ab roller, I get super sore in my upper traps. I'm like, good, that's what you should be doing. Because when your traps are engaged and you're really keeping your scapular stable, then your lats, yeah, should be very much involved in the ab roller. In fact, that question that we always get in the calisthenics world of how do I work my back if I don't have like a pull-up bar or something, ab roller, for sure. It's one of the best ways to go about it. Anything to add to that, Lee?
No, like I said, I've done them, and yeah, you really feel it's basically just like doing a bodyweight pullover. Really, it's a really hard, intense exercise, and again, you can make it progressive on how far you lean over. But yeah, it's not just the core work; definitely your back as well. Yeah,
it's really a big full body. When I did the RKC several years ago with Dan John, I mean, one of the most premier strength coaches in the world, and he spent a good 10 minutes being like, ab rollers, everybody should have them. Everybody should be doing them. Like they're basically, he's like, every Christmas I buy everybody ab rollers kind of thing. So he's like, it's one of the best things you can possibly do for yourself, just period. Let's get a little bit more detailed here. Is there a better way to figure out protein? Decrease or high amounts of, sorry, clicked on wrong one. It's switched. Sorry about that. We'll get to the protein one in a second. High rest periods for quality reps, but shouldn't you decrease rest over time? Allows your body to adapt. I would say yes, but the general rule of thumb, especially if you're trying to build muscle and strength, is rest is necessary so you can put a lot of energy and effort into each set. If you're not resting very much and you're coming to set and your next set is crap, probably a little bit more rest, but it's going to be very different depending on your condition for the day, depending on the muscle group you're working, depending on your level of fitness and other factors. What do you do for rest there, Lee? What are your thoughts?
Usually 3 minutes at least. If you're doing anything below 8 reps, I reckon 2 mins max. Anything below 5, 3. Anything below triples, I would say 5.
Good call.
Just because of like your energy system, your ATP CP energy system, you need to have at least 3 minutes for that to recover. So if you're really going for like pure strength, I think that Pavel guy said take as long as you need. Like his grease to groove idea is pure strength, 5 to 15 minutes. You know, you want to have as long rest as you can if you're going for that. If you're doing skill-based work, which is very, very technical and a stress on your central nervous system, I would have at least 3 minutes personally, because you want to be fresh. You don't want to be reinforcing movement patterns while you're fatigued, because you'll lay down foundations of poor form. And if you're doing like heavy work, more rest. If you're going into like isolation work, you get away with 60 seconds really, like bicep stuff and triceps. It's not as important, but definitely compound. I normally go at least 2-3 minutes personally.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, so back to that protein one. I found it, Mr. Adam White here. Better way to figure out how much protein you need in your diet without counting. This is definitely one I'm an advocate for. As I always say, stabilize and progress. That's the basic program for everything. And those are the 2 things you need. So first and foremost, get to a stable diet where your protein intake is consistent. It doesn't have to be counted, but I always advocate get some protein at each meal, and the amount that you're getting is just eyeballing it, roughly the same. Then if you think you might want to add more, just add more. You don't have to count things. If I have 3 eggs normally and I add 5, if I have 5, that's more, because we really don't need to know how much protein we're eating. We need to know, do I need just more than I normally get? So you just need to have a perspective on how much you normally get, then add some and see if it helps. If it helps, great. And if it doesn't, well, there's your answer. Do you count much at all or do any sort of macro counting, Lee?
No, I think the only thing I try and I don't really focus on protein too much, unless I'm trying to cut at the minute. It's not going very well at the minute. But if I'm trying to lose weight, I try and keep my protein higher just to try and maintain muscle. But I don't really count. I agree, try and eat it throughout the day. And I think if you've ever been in a position where you have counted or things like that, after a while, once you've done it or not, you have a slight idea that's about 10, 15, 20. You know, a lot of the time you're having like tins of stuff, it's got it right there on you. It's quite easy to know, but I don't really count. I think it's about 1.5 kilos, 1.5 grams per kilo. It's not as much as I think people think it is.
Yeah,
there's a lot of scaremongering and
much. I notice a lot of people, when they get stuck and frustrated, they tend to focus too much on one thing. They focus on weight or reps or how much protein I'm getting. Usually when we're stuck, it's several things. And it's usually not that one thing. My experience is if that one thing really mattered, then you should notice a very significant difference pretty quick. So if you were like, I don't know if I'm getting enough reps, and you increase your volume by 50%, if that's really what's the cause, you should have a very noticeable difference in some way, shape, or form within like a week. But if you've spent the past several months saying, how much protein do I need? Should I change this? What about this protein? What about that protein? The longer you're trying to solve a problem with one variable, the less likely that variable really matters. Yeah. So you want to move on to other things, like maybe it's not that, maybe it's something else. So moving right along. So anything popping up that you wanted to address here, Lee, that I don't want to?
No, I've literally just been scrolling on ones that you've been looking at. I'll have a little browse now.
Yeah. Let's see. We'll get a couple more here in the last little bit. Oh, it's so hard for me to read. Like I read and things keep scrolling on up. All right, so optimal weight increase when doing weighted calisthenics. Absolute amount, kilograms versus percentage body weight. I think it really depends on the exercise, because some exercises are going to be much harder. Like you could add 10 pounds onto a weighted dip on bars, but that might be 5 pounds on a weighted dip on rings. I don't think you'll so much have optimal as it is appropriate for what you're doing and where you're at in your conditioning. But do you have any sort of like a formula when you add weight, like, oh, I'll probably go up by a certain amount, or do you just kind of go by feel?
Go by feel. You again, depends what you're after, but I normally I'll judge the weight by how many reps I can do. Or if I'm building up, like if I'm doing weighted calisthenics, or when I used to do weight training, you build up to have an idea of what you want to go for, and you do your warm-up sets towards it, so you kind of get an idea of when you make an increase how much you should go up by. But a lot of the time it's just sort of, you're always better going a little bit less, because the last thing you want is to put too much and then you burn yourself out, and then you're then more focused on, I've got to get this amount of reps, and your form shoots down. So you're better to undershoot, do the set, get a really good one, and then next time you can go, oh, you know what, I added 5 kg and that was actually a bit too easy. Next time I'll do 7.5 or whatever it is. And that's why it's handy to write it all down, and to see how it feels. Like I always do a warm-up set with the weight that I'm going to use to see how it feels before my sets start, and just to prime the body, like, you're playing with this weight today, get ready for it, sort of thing. So if I know I'm doing 20 kilo weighted pull-ups, it'll be, I work up towards it, whether it be body weight, 10 kg, 15, do a set on 20, a warm-up set, 1 or 2 reps, rest 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll do my set of 5, whatever it is, and then I go from there. Yeah.
Really good question here. This one gets, as an ex-cyclist, I used to do this one. Nash asking, going for a long jog as leg day. Now, I used to make that mistake of thinking, well, I'm a biker. I race mountain bikes. I don't need to work my legs. And then I eventually realized my mistake, and it's like, well, I'm a biker. I need to work my legs because I ride my bike. But can things like that count as some degree of strength and hypertrophy training? My experience is possibly, but it's got to be intense. The biggest my legs ever were was when I would run up and down Mount Mansfield back in Vermont. And I would get to the bottom where my legs would just be thrashed. I would be sore for days after that. But that's running down a 4,000-foot mountain. Casual jog, it's all about intensity, I would say. The less intense the run is, the less of a stimulus it's going to be. So that's why you'll often hear people say that sprints or hill sprints are better for the legs, running up the hill quickly. I think that's going to be more, the longer time you spend doing something, the less intensity you naturally have, and probably the less of a stimulus you'll have. That's my take. What's yours, Lee?
Yeah, I agree. I think I made a video ages ago, probably got rid of it by now, but one of the best things you can do for your legs is hill sprints, because you know, another way to activate your fast twitch muscle fibers. You don't just have to lift heavy, but being explosive. And if you're running up a steep hill, that power that you need to drive yourself up, you soon feel it in your legs. Obviously, I would say it's more glutes and hamstrings, but it's a hell of a workout. I mean, even if you went interval running up some hills, like, you're definitely going to feel it in your legs. I wouldn't say it would be the best way, the most efficient way, if you wanted to build the biggest legs or the strongest legs overall, but it could definitely complement leg training if you went for a long, like, hill sprints, and then in between started jumping around doing some lunges and things like that, and incorporate it into maybe your cardio day. Then by then that would be, I would think, a pretty good leg day, I think.
Yeah, and that goes right into this one here, top 3 leg exercises. And I'm glad they asked for top 3, because one of the biggest mistakes I find people make with leg training is they do it one way. But the legs are like the Swiss Army knife of the body. They're capable of performing at a high level in so many different ways. So if we just sprint, or if we just do like leg press and something, we're training the legs in such a narrow scope of their range of capability that it's very limited as a response. So for that, I would say something that is very stable and easy to work with a high level of fatigue. Now for me, actually, I would put hamstring curls, TRX hamstring curls, and sissy squats in that. And I know a lot of people, their shackles get up on that one, but I find those are the easiest way to work my muscles as hard as possible. So those 2 exercises and something explosive. So jumping or sprinting to complement that. So that way you're getting a big range with that. But Leo, I'll let you add your 3 there.
Hill sprints. A big fan of those sort of step ups. You get a really big box and you step up. Really like them, especially if you really think on trying to hook the hamstrings back. You really feel that in the glutes and that. And then if I was better at it, I would say just the barbell back squat, but I'm not very good at it. Probably if I could, I would say a pistol squat, but something along that line, or a lunge. I don't think you can go wrong with, if you were to incorporate those 3 into your leg day, you're pretty much hitting the legs from every angle. And like you said, Swiss Army knife, you're hitting it with something explosive, and stability wise, you're getting everything you need for it.
Absolutely, for sure. Last question here, and then we're going to start wrapping things on up. So combine isometrics with weighted calisthenics. I addressed this, shameless plug, in my next book. Just came out literally yesterday, Overcoming Isometrics. I addressed some programming variables on how you want to combine isometrics with dynamic exercises. And it's probably, there's 3 main ways that I recommend it. One is beforehand as a warm-up, or you can do it afterwards as a finisher. Or one of my favorite strategies is I superset. So I'll do an isometric, then a dynamic of the same muscle group. And I find that's particularly helpful on days when I'm off. It's like, I just cannot get my back to fire up. These pull-ups feel off. I feel flat. If I do like an isometric row and then I go do pull-ups, it makes the exercise feel real good, and it gets me right back on track. Do you play much with isometrics there, Lee?
No, I don't at all. I don't really do a lot. I don't really do a lot of skill work, really. I don't do a lot of that. It's something I probably, once I've built a good level of strength and then I can taper it off and just do a bit of maintenance, I might then start developing a bit of skill work, but I mainly just do sort of calisthenics, bodyweight training, and just mainly strength-based, usually. I don't have a lot of experience with isometric training at all.
Yeah, that's right. It's certainly not a very popular discipline, and I'm trying to change that naturally. I think that'll be a big thing that's going to come down the pipe in the next year or 2. Just like calisthenics, like 10 years ago, if you told someone you did calisthenics, people would be like, "What? Like jumping jacks and crunches? Like I don't understand." So there's a
lot of people that don't know what calisthenics is, and I used to get told off for saying weighted bodyweight training, because obviously I can see that there's a bit of a contradiction there. But if I say weighted calisthenics, a lot of people go, "What's that?" Or they just think it's, you know, when you see them spinning around the bar and twisting, and they think it's that. So they don't realize it's just moving your body, really.
I went from telling people, trying to convince them when I'd sell them calisthenics, they'd think endless push-ups and crunches. And it's like, no, 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 it can be intense. It can be more higher level stuff. And now when I tell people I do calisthenics, they're like, so I'd like to get into it, but I can't do all that acrobatic stuff I see on YouTube. Like, no, 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 it's down, down. Like, I got to completely reverse people's expectations of it now.
It's still that mindset, though, that people do still think bodyweight training is more for endurance or toning, as they like to say it, and more reps. Or you got the far extreme where they think, well, it's all the skill stuff, but there's so much about it that I don't know what drew me to it in the first place, really. Yeah,
yeah. It is what you make it, though. I think that's the final point I want to make, is that there is no success had in any method, whether it's weighted calisthenics, progressive calisthenics, weightlifting, sprinting, whatever. Your results depend on you. And I'm speaking to everybody here, not you specifically, but I used to make that mistake of like, oh, I tried this method, it didn't work. Or I did this, it didn't work and stuff. And really, I should have been looking at the mirror, because everything we're using is just a tool. There is no inherent ability to get results from any sort of tool. I can't pick up a paintbrush and paint like Picasso, right? Or Bob Ross or something. It's the person applying the methods that determines the success. So whenever we're like, oh, I used this and it didn't work, that's our opportunity to be introspective and be like, what did I not apply correctly? And sometimes we get dogmatic about the methods, like, well, this method says do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, okay, if that's not working for you, it's your job to know why that isn't pulling you in alignment, why that doesn't apply to you. It's not that the method is bad. You know, like for me personally, like I have the hardest time with some types of training. And emotionally, I want to be like, this is the worst thing ever. But I know it's all me, because someone else could be like, this is the best thing ever. It's because they know more about how to use it well than I do. It's never the actual method. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm going to try weighted calisthenics, or I want to explore ring training or something like that, know that it's all on you. And if you read a book, or if you follow a program like my Overcoming Isometrics or something, and you're not getting results, please ask us questions, because the results are out there, but no program is complete. There's always something new that we've got to learn and discover to put more pieces into the puzzle, because no one ever is like, oh, I read this one book, now I'm set for life. There's always more to learn to it. What other things can you add to that, Lee? Finish off, I'll let you.
Yeah, I don't think there's like any particular perfect program, perfect way of training. I think the key thing is for people to get out there and explore, see what works for them. And I think one point I brought up in a previous video was, you can try all these different programs, but people are too scared to adapt. And you want to find exercises and find a way to train that you're excited to do and you're passionate about doing, and you pick exercises that you enjoy. There's nothing worse than going to a gym and following a program and doing a certain way of training or an exercise that you don't enjoy and you dread going to the gym.
Yeah.
So explore, see what you like, and dial down and focus on things that you're passionate about and enjoy, and just create balance in there for your body. And I think that's probably the best way in which you could do it, is just experiment, explore. And weighted calisthenics or ring training is a tool in the toolbox that you could add in, make it your bread and butter, or you can pick it in and take it out whenever you want, just to spice things up for you. So
perfect, dude. That's the best advice I think I could ever give anybody doing anything.
Man with a plan.
Learn how to build a ship in a bottle or stuff that's experienced.
Yeah.
It's your job to know what works best for you. I get questions all the time, like, Matt, you said this, and this other YouTuber says that. And I'm like, yeah. So, like, that's my perspective. And it's great. Like, how horrible would it be if on YouTube everybody had the same information and everybody said the same thing? It'd be terrible. It'd be so boring, too. It's good to get different ideas, but ultimately, whoever's watching and listening to this, it's your job to know what's best for you, and to explore and experiment, and to pick and choose, so you're in control. Because Lee and I, we got ideas, and at the end of the day, Lee's going to do what Lee's doing. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You do what you do, and we're all going to get stronger together because of it. So, Lee, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on.
Yeah,
thank
you for having me on.
Thank you, everybody, for your comments, your questions. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these live streams because, damn, these are fun. I enjoy these.
They're good, aren't they?
So look for more. And as a reminder, I have notifications on the community tab and on the RDP Instagram to give you a heads up when these live streams are happening. So be sure to follow on RDP, Red Delta Project, on Instagram for more updates. Lee, you have socials that you want people to follow as well?
It's mainly just a YouTube channel. I rarely use the Instagram, so that's mainly just the YouTube channel. It's the best way to reach people, I think.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll talk to you next time. Till then, be fit, live free.